autism, awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm a autism, awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm a autism, awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm a autism, awareness angel, cause the view from the spectrum is a better point of view.
Hello, I'm Tally, and welcome back to Autism 30. Today on our podcast, we are speaking with Miss Helen Ries. You may have already read, seen, and heard about her on television and various newspapers, talking about her story about being a loyal daughter and sister, caretaker, wife, and good-hearted person who has met unexpected challenges with fortitude and grace and gained a wealth of knowledge for others to benefit from. The reason why she's talking with us today is because of her willingness to share her story with others to help educate the public so that they may divert frustrating and complicated situations in your families, situations that can have dire consequences on the quality of life for everyone involved. Looking after a person with special needs once the parents have passed. Hello, Miss Ries.
Hi, Telly.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. When I originally heard your story, I wanted to say I was in shock at the lack of awareness I had about your particular circumstance and how ignorant I was. I was also shaken because the lack of knowledge I had would have affected not only my son's future, but also whomever will be looking after him once I'm gone. I'm so grateful that you're here, and to those listening, this is truly an essential podcast for everyone to listen to.
Thanks for having me, Telly.
It's our honor having you here with us today. Now, let's start. What were your parents like?
So my mother and father, I should preface by saying, both have recently passed away. My parents were really quite amazing people. They were both very resilient, very strong. They had a strong anti-establishment, anti-authority streak in them. They were both new Canadians, and here my mom was here without her family, and my father's family was very small. So they were incredibly resourceful in their own right. They both recently passed away, one after another, and it was quite shocking for both of them because they were both relatively young, in their early 70s, and fit and happy and healthy people.
And we're sorry to hear about their passing.
Thank you.
And what was your brother like?
So my brother is, I guess, quite similar to my mom and dad. He's also quite strong. He's stubborn. He's also very, very resourceful, curious, bordering on nosy. And he's very community oriented. He likes being part of his neighborhood and connecting with people.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah. So.
And what was family like growing up with a special needs brother?
Well, I don't have another experience to really compare how it was different. And I have to say that since my parents have passed away and I've been, launched into the disability advocacy world, I have been doing a lot of reflection and reading and reflection on my life as a young person.
Yes.
And I think that if I were to talk about growing up with a brother who has a disability, I would say that I was always questing for normalization.
Yes.
So because I was perceived to have a family that was quote unquote different, or to be part of a family that was quote unquote different,
yes,
I was always looking to be as normal as possible. So for example, when I was a teenager in the 80s and lots of people were doing, crazy things with their hair or their clothes and safety pins and whatever.
I remember the spray net. Absolutely.
And, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep it on the straight and narrow. Because that was important for me to be perceived as typical. And then I guess the other piece that I have been reflecting on a lot was my behavior. So as a young person, I had a lot, or as a teenager, I had a lot of friends who would, steal their mom and dad's vodka and rum and drink it in the park and that kind of thing. Get up to no good, being out really late or trying to smoke. And I never wanted to give my parents any additional trouble or grief through antisocial or bad behavior. So I was quite a good teenager.
You sounded quite responsible.
Yes,
for your age.
Very responsible. And I think I was probably challenging in other ways, like all teenage girls. But
as a high school teacher, I think it comes with the territory.
Most certainly. So I was, I was well behaved, but with other challenges, like I said, I'm sure. But that's what our life was like. I also should say that as a family, we were very close.
Yes.
I don't know if we would have been close otherwise, but I certainly think that having a family member with a disability brought us together with more fortitude and
Absolutely. I know my husband and I say that our son definitely brought our family closer together.
Yeah, you can't help it, right? There's only two choices: bring you closer together or drive you apart, I think.
Absolutely. And I know we find we're stronger, and it sounds like that was the similar case for you.
Yes.
And what are some of the immediate challenges that occurred in the sad passing of your parents?
So the immediate challenge was really grief. So grief is something that we don't really acknowledge or talk a lot about in our society.
Very true.
Mm-hmm. It's something that I think a lot of people think, well, just get over it already, or
unfortunately, yes.
Mm-hmm. And it's, if anybody has experienced a loss of somebody you love very deeply, it is traumatic.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And it's long lasting. So it's not something that you just wake up and it's gone.
Yes.
We're talking years.
I can imagine. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's years of recovering from the loss. And that's not what we're used to in a fast-paced, get over it already kind of society.
Yes, true.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the loss like for you and your brother as well?
Yeah. So for me, of course, because we lost our mom and dad quite close together.
Yes.
We lost one right after the other. It was very overwhelming.
Yes.
So it's like we just recovered from the grief of my father, and then we had my mom pass away.
And that must have been quite shocking.
It was very shocking. So I was drowning in my own grief in a way, and then I had my brother who was also grieving very deeply.
Yes.
And while I'm able to find things that I need to help me feel better, I have a large network of friends that I could access for support. My brother wasn't necessarily able to identify what he needed in order to feel better. And as we all know, persons with disabilities don't have large networks of friends necessarily.
Yes.
And so he didn't have that to draw on either.
And I'm really happy that you did mention that your brother does have feelings and that he is going through the similar thing that you are, which is grief, because I think often what people fail to see is that people with special needs have the exact same emotional range that we do, and they feel things just as equally as we do, and that
Exactly.
You acknowledge that really well too.
Of course, that's really important. I mean, it's almost like it's even harder for them because what I mentioned, they don't necessarily know what's going to make them feel better. So for example, I knew that I needed to see a grief counselor. So I sought
Yes.
out a grief counselor, made myself an appointment, and worked with a grief counselor. But that's not maybe something that my brother would have the cognition to be able to recognize and organize for himself. So that's in addition to my own grief, managing my own grief,
Yes.
I was also managing my brother's grief.
And that's a huge responsibility to take on as
Right.
well. What was it like taking responsibility for not only your parents, but your brother's needs as well?
So maybe I should just talk a little bit about how I ended up taking care of my mom as well as my
Absolutely.
brother. Yeah. So when my dad passed away, I
Yes.
thought, I was watching my mom and I thought she was struggling a little bit, that it was hard for her to take care of my brother on her own.
Yes.
And so I said to my husband, I think we should all move in together.
Yes.
And we're of European descent. And I mean, European families do tend to live together multi-generationally.
Absolutely, they do.
Yeah. So that was not an odd request to him. And we had also lived with my grandmother. So we all moved in together.
Lovely.
Yeah. I was a little bit surprised when the thing that blindsided me about moving in with my mom and my brother was how much they needed me.
Yes.
So I wasn't used to being needed.
Yes.
And that was really challenging. So for the time that I did live with my mom, which was unfortunately only a year and a half, she seemed to need me an awful lot. And my brother did too. So.
Yes. So you had the responsibility of your mother's needs, your brother's needs, and I'm sure your husband's needs,
Right.
and somewhere you came in.
Oh, and don't forget about the cats too. They need me as well. So yeah. So it was really, assuming the responsibility of taking care of all these people was really probably more significant than I had recognized.
Yes.
But that's what we do as humans. We take care of each other.
Good humans like you do. Yes, they certainly do. And what types of situations have frustrated you that you didn't foresee?
Well, I have quite a few things about that. So one of the things that has really frustrated me has been the issue of governmental supports
Yes.
for persons with disabilities. So the bureaucracy about being a person with a disability in Ontario is absolutely overwhelming. And I hadn't anticipated that. So my parents had never really included me in that part of my brother's life.
Okay.
I think they wanted me to, actually there's a lot that they didn't include me in. And I think they thought that they were doing me a favor. So they
Okay.
thought that if I was not involved in all the hard stuff, that would be good.
Okay.
And but in actual fact, it was really arduous to go from 0 to 100 and learning how to do all these things properly.
Oh, it must have been.
So I have to say, in the first few months of taking over my brother's paperwork, we had an audit, a financial audit, and a drug audit from Ontario Disability Support.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, they weren't that big a deal. It was just sending in statements, but it's very disconcerting and
Absolutely.
and yeah. I mean, I think the other piece that I'd like to touch on about that was very frustrating was the issue of poverty. So seeing that really my brother has no choice but to be poor in Ontario, because that's the only option for persons with disability. The other option is to be completely off benefits and to be a multimillionaire, which is not an option for very many of us.
Yes, and you're giving accurate statistics, and unfortunately in Canada that is the case, that many people who are classified as disabled do live in poverty.
Right.
And I'm sure you would agree that in a country like Canada, who is one of the richest countries on the world, this isn't acceptable.
That's right. I mean, I don't understand why, because my brother is a person with a disability, he must be poor. And
neither do I.
A lot of people say, well, if there's money, then why are they on benefits? But it's not it's not as cut and dry as that.
No.
I mean, if you have the money to completely go off benefits, well, then you would fall into the multimillionaire or millionaire demographic, and
Yes.
that's just not an option. And yeah.
And what do you wish your parents put in place for you to make things easier for you and your family?
Mm-hmm. So my parents, there's quite a few things that I wish they'd had in place. My brother never had an independent living support worker.
Okay.
I guess my parents thought they didn't need one, and that they could take care of everything on their own.
They
And
sound like quite strong people.
they were really strong, and I think they were very proud of that strength. So that also didn't really help. When-
As they should be, but I can understand your circumstance.
right. And after my parents passed away and I was talking to lots of people, I realized that there are a number of families that do incorporate independent living support workers into their lives and have done so for years and years and years.
Yes.
So that there's a strong relationship and a rhythm and an independence for their family member that wasn't available for my brother. So my parents had also they didn't necessarily have a large network for my brother. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think that was a reflection of who they were. They were not hugely social people. They didn't have an enormous network of friends. They were more introverted.
Yes.
And you can't change who you are in order
No.
to accommodate family, what your family might need in the future. But it would have also been great if there had been more natural supports for my brother.
Yes.
And I think they could have achieved that maybe even by having an independent facilitator or somebody who could have negotiated that for them.
Okay.
I just think that some things are also newer and
Yes.
maybe weren't available at that time, or my parents had tried and it hadn't worked. And I think there's only so much people can take, honestly.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a really important point is that things are constantly changing.
Yes.
And that not only do you have to look after your child, but you also have to be up on latest policy and latest changes that are not necessarily broadcasted on television as a commercial. You really have to keep aware of changes being made.
Yeah. It's a full-time job to keep aware of everything that's going on.
Oh, no question. and what steps do you think that they were unaware of that if they knew they would have put into place?
I think that they would have maintained a better relationship with developmental services. So I don't know what it's like in other provinces, but we have a developmental services in Ontario that coordinates services for families.
Okay.
And I think it had never been very fruitful for my parents and my brother. I think not much had ever come out of that. So my parents just basically gave up.
Okay.
And so I had to restart those relationships, which entailed going through reigniting the relationship with developmental services, entailed doing a reassessment of the supported index scale, I think is what it is. It's called SIS, which is a very arduous, it was a 2-day interview.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's 2 days of my brother listening to all the things that he can't do.
Which isn't actually effective for him.
No, nor me. It was awful.
Yes.
And we both were quite depressed afterwards because don't forget, we were still also grieving when we went through this process.
That sounds horrible.
It was horrible. I think one of the provinces in Canada, it might be Alberta, has actually stopped using the SIS as an evaluation tool. And I think that would be a wonderful thing to see across the country because it's really a very devastating process to go through.
Yes.
So all that to say that I think my parents would, if they had known, they would have maintained their relationship with developmental services. And yeah.
And how has this affected your ability to properly care for your brother?
Well, it means that I've had to restart everything on my own.
Yes.
So I actually had to leave employment. I had a regular 9-to-5 job. That was really quite a good job.
Yes.
And to just get through all the things that I had to do,
yes.
I couldn't work. I needed to take some time to do it.
And I want people to be aware of the fact that many parents and caregivers do end up leaving their full-time employment to look after their child or their sibling with special needs, that your story is not an uncommon one.
No, and I think people don't understand. They think, oh, you're just going to go in for a half an hour appointment. Like, what's it to you? Why do you have to give up your full-time employment for that? But no appointment is unique in that you're just going in and telling a quick story and leaving.
Very true.
There's the accumulation or collection of paperwork. There is answering a multitude of questions. And then there's also the emotional impact of every single one of those
And
meetings.
I'm happy you mentioned that.
I always found it amazing that, let's say I had a meeting in the morning, it killed the rest of my day.
Yes.
It was so devastating. I think the devastating piece is that the perception, I felt like I was always being, I felt that the part that was so difficult is that I was coming in, people were assuming that I was lying, and that you
Yes.
always have to work your way backwards to prove yourself not a liar.
Yes, yes, I've had that experience in the past before too.
And it's very humiliating, very
Especially
devastating.
when we're honest people.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's very few people who are dishonest,
I agree.
and yet you're always catering to those few people by disproving yourself a liar.
Yes.
And it's humiliating and demoralizing. And let's not forget that when you're doing these kind of things, you're not doing it with a clean emotional state. In my case, it was grief, and somebody else's case, it might be something else. And so it's very impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. And how has this affected your own immediate family's quality of life?
Well, I think that while I was trying to take care of myself, and while I was trying to take care of my brother, and also deal with all the bureaucracy and learning that I was doing, I wasn't paying as much attention to my husband.
Yes, because you are married.
Yeah, I've been married for 12 years, and I am married to a really wonderful, caring, kind, open-hearted man.
Yes, he is.
I felt that, he was really getting left out. And there were days when I would see him on, we'd go to a restaurant and I'd sit across the table from him, and I'd say, wow, I feel like I haven't seen you in years.
Yes.
And it was just that, being inside your head, and I don't know. So
Because your priorities had to shift.
they did shift. Yeah. And he patiently and willingly took a backseat.
Yes.
I think he's not really willing to be so patient anymore. He's demanding more from me, but that's fine because we're in a different place. But, it's certainly a quality of life piece. If you don't, it could have been that he wasn't willing to take a backseat for that period of time. And then I would have had the dissolution of our marriage on top of everything. But
Absolutely, which would have been devastating. Because
Right.
did your husband know about disabilities before meeting your brother, or?
Oh, that's a great question, because actually, I have known my whole life that one day this day would come.
Yes.
I didn't think it would come so quickly, that, I would be taking care of my brother. And so it's always been present for me. But for my husband, he had never even met a person with a disability until he met my brother.
Yes.
So he certainly didn't have it in his mind's eye that one day he would be the primary caregiver. So
Absolutely. And what do you wish would change with the policies to make things easier for everyone involved?
I wish that there's actually two things that I wish would change. So
Yes.
one is philosophical, in that I wish the government would not assume the government knows best, that sort of
Very
really paternalistic perspective on caregiving for families, or caregiving within families. I think that they come in with their forms and their evaluations, and they're telling you what you have access to, what you can do.
Yes.
And, with the number of people that were involved in the management of our case,
Yes.
we could have just taken those salaries and given me the money, and I would have been able to direct services to my brother in a more effective way. Because I have to say, it's been 1.5 years since my mom passed away, and that I've been working on getting services for my brother, and we really don't have anything different.
Okay.
So anything that we have has been something that I have sought out on my own and paid for on our own.
Wow.
Yeah.
And for families that can't, that
Right.
must be
I don't know.
very
Yeah.
difficult.
I mean, it's been stressful for us as well. So the second piece that I wish that would change is more practical. So there is limits on what you can gift a family member when they're on benefits.
Yes.
And there's also a limit on how many assets a
Yes.
person with a disability can hold. So very recently in British Columbia, you've lifted that asset level limit from, it was $5,000, which is also $5,000 in Ontario, and now it's up to $100,000.
Yes.
And also there's a $6,000 limit on what you can gift a family member.
And can you please go into gifting?
Sure. So gift is when, I mean, it's actually the wrong word. It
Yes.
shouldn't be called a gift because
I agree.
really what it is it's a subsidy so that your family member is not living in poverty. That's really what it is.
Yes.
So I can give my brother up to $6,000 a year. And it can be for anything. So let's say he wants to have a computer
Yes.
or a TV, or even if I buy him clothing, that's all considered gift.
Yes.
That amount of money that that's transferring from me to him. And so Ontario has not caught up to the leadership of BC and also Alberta, which doesn't have an asset, also has had an asset level limit of 100,000 for quite some time, I believe.
Okay.
And we're waiting for Ontario to do the same. And
So, what does your brother get from the government once a month?
so Paul's on Ontario Disability Support, so he gets about $1,100 a month.
Okay, so the 1,100 and your subsidy on top of that would be what?
$500. That's all I can give. It's $500 a month.
So the Ontario government is expecting your brother to be able to live on every single month a limit of
$1,600.
And that's it.
Yeah. And, that's not possible because we've recently done some research into the average cost of housing and food in Ontario.
Yes.
And it costs over $1,600 a month in shelter.
Yes.
And $625 a month in food.
Yes, especially with real estate and rentals going up all the time.
That's right. So if you think that with the $1,100 and then a $500 gift, you're not even covering shelter.
No, and that answers really clearly for those people that might have been shocked earlier on in the podcast when we say that special needs people often live in poverty. This is a clear indication of one of the reasons why.
That's right. So family members are subsidizing housing because
Yes.
also, you want people to live in safe communities.
Absolutely.
Where they have access to public transportation and access to grocery stores and food. So you're talking about already a place that may cost, the average amount, if not more.
Yes.
Also, family members are subsidizing accessibility in the home. So often they've adapted the home so that they're suitable for their family member. So can you imagine if you moved into a place that was new and you needed to adapt it, and the food as well. We all need to eat good food.
Absolutely.
That keeps us healthy and well and out of the hospital and the medical system. And family members are subsidizing that as well.
Absolutely. And if you were to speak to your parents if they were still alive and be able to make changes, what would you advise them to do?
I would have advised them to keep connected to the government system.
Yes.
I think I mentioned that before about keeping an open line of communication. Also, my parents left part of their money, their bequeathment, I guess it's called, when someone passes away. They had allocated my brother's amount to something called a Henson Trust,
Okay.
which might be unique to Ontario, but I think it's called a discretionary trust in other provinces.
Yes.
And the discretionary trust is under the scrutiny of the disability support program.
Okay.
So I need to report to them every year the in and outflow of money from the discretionary trust and account for it.
Wow.
Yeah, which is really, doesn't that contravene the title of a discretionary trust?
Yes.
So I would have asked my parents to actually leave the money outside of the trust, or at least part of it. Not all family situations are such that you can necessarily trust somebody will support their brother or sister in the best light. But
Yes.
my parents could have with me, and I think they just thought that the Henson Trust was the best option because that's what they've been told, but it wasn't necessarily true. And yeah, if they were still alive too, I also would have told them to maybe relax on how much they do for my brother.
Yes.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest challenges.
And I know that's something that my husband and I go through as well with our own son. It's what his therapist said was, he can do it. Let him fail, and he will learn, and then he will do it. Because I know with my husband and I, we always want to do for our son because we love him and we want him to succeed.
Right.
But sometimes that's not necessarily the best thing for him.
That's right. I love that you said giving him a chance to fail, because we all fail all the time.
Yes,
and,
very true.
and there's a lot of learning that comes from that failure.
Yes.
And if you never have that opportunity to learn, then it's really hard to progress. And yeah, it was really a big challenge for me. My mom and my dad, I don't know why, especially as they got older, perhaps it was out of guilt, or I'm not really sure what it was, but they did actually more for him in his later years.
And I know it can be easier to do things for your child.
Yeah.
I'm speaking from my own personal,
Right.
but it's not necessarily the best thing for.
Right. It really isn't. I mean, since my mom passed away, I said it was a year and a half ago, I've seen amazing changes in my brother in terms of his independence.
Lovely.
So sometimes I'll call him and I would say, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in the coffee shop. I'm having a cappuccino." Or more importantly, he used to only take one bus, and that was the bus to and from work.
Yes.
And to get him to take another bus was always a really big challenge, and we'd have to follow the bus in the car, and lots of training. Bus training was a big thing.
Yes.
Then the other day, I hear the rustling downstairs, and it's my brother. He's come home, and I said, "Well, what are you doing here? How did you get home?" "Oh, I took the bus." I said, "Well, which one?" And he said, "Oh, I took the bus 150. And he'd never, ever taken that bus before.
Oh, well done.
And he just hopped on it because he read that it went up to our neighborhood, and he got on, and no bus training, no following the bus in the car and that kind of thing. He
That's
just did it on his
great.
own. So yeah, so there's a lot of capacity there that I think we don't acknowledge.
Very true.
Mm-hmm.
What do you wish the public would know?
I wish the public would know that disability and poverty do not have to be synonymous. That, we don't have to assume that because a person has a disability that they must or should or deserve to be poor.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of parents who have children with disabilities talk to me about my situation in relation to their own lives. And, what should I do? How should I prepare? How can I make sure my child is going to be cared for? And, I think in the end, you can only do the best that you can do.
Yes.
Make sure everything's prepared as best as possible, and then just live your life.
Absolutely. And with the information you're giving us on this podcast, I think people will be better informed to be able to make better decisions.
Hopefully.
Yes. How strongly would you advise the public to look into their own legal planning?
I strongly advise it. So my parents had done a lot of work around their legal planning.
Yes.
My parents had followed, I think you've done podcasts before with Plan.
Yes, I believe that podcast is dated July 15th, 2016.
Right. So my parents were involved with Plan, and they followed the recommendations of Plan with regards to their financial and legal arrangements. And thanks to that, amongst all the difficulties and all the challenges of dealing with assuming primary caregiving of my brother, I did not have financial or legal challenges. I shouldn't say, sorry, I did not have legal challenges.
Which is wonderful. And I know one of the things that was mentioned in the podcast of Plan is they strongly advise to seek professional help.
That's right. So there was an affiliate of Plan in Ottawa called Lifetime Networks, and Lifetime Networks had a lawyer that would come and give talks about wills.
Yes.
And so my parents used him because he was a specialist in, families that have persons with disabilities in them, and did their will through him. So it worked out well.
And I think that's really important also that you mentioned is when you are going to seek a lawyer to write a will, that seek a lawyer that actually has awareness of creating a will with people with disabilities in mind. Because I know often lawyers, some of them don't have any awareness of that.
Right. And I think that's really important because I do have a friend who also has a sister with a disability, and her parents didn't do it properly in their will, and she had a lot of trouble as a result.
Which is really unfortunate. And which brings me to my next question. Why do you think a will is not only vital, but not having one is a form of abuse to those left behind?
Those words are really strong, but I like them.
Thank you.
I think it is a form of abuse in that you're neglecting to provide for your family the resources that they need to carry on with their life.
Yes.
In the best way possible. And also, my brother can't necessarily fend for himself in the way that he may need to. So
Yes.
I don't think in our relationship we do. I think that I do my best to keep his interest in mind, but that may not be the case in every circumstance. And sometimes we try our hardest to do the best job, but it's not always the right one.
Yes.
So at least with properly done legal planning, you're taking care of that.
And meeting the wishes of the parents.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what would you like the world to know about taking care of a sibling?
So I think one of the most important pieces is that I am not a mother.
Yes.
So I am not Paul's mother. In fact, it's very challenging because I have no direct authority over him. So I can tell him, go to bed and turn off your light. But, that
he doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to. I mean, it's just, me getting him to observe rules of our shared living agreement, because that's what I call it. I call our situation in our house a shared living agreement.
That's a good term.
Part is to be, amicable and friendly. And when you don't go to bed on time and you're grouchy and you come down and tear strips off people, that's not part of our agreement.
No.
But at the same time, I can't tell him you need to go to bed on time and you need to do this and you need to do that. I try, but I have no authority. And that's the really big difference. And what it requires is actually, negotiation skills, almost like facilitation, negotiation, mediation.
Yes.
Not skills that I naturally have. And I'm doing it every day, all day.
And you're doing a great job. And what are the main challenges of looking after a sibling, in your words?
Well, I think it would be that authoritative piece, the lack of authority. And also the big challenge is always being fair. Often I'm walking a gray line about, am I making this decision because it's good for me? Or is this decision good for him? Or am I saying this because it makes me feel good? Or am I saying this because he needs to hear it? And that is a really hard and really exhausting to always walk that gray line.
But I think those questions that you mentioned are really good and vital for everybody to listen to who are looking after someone with disabilities. I think to go through the process of thinking those questions is really not only vital, but essential to maintain a balanced household, if I'm correct.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And what are the benefits and joys of looking after a sibling, in your words?
Well, I think the neat part is I have a new relationship with my brother.
Yes.
So we had our childhood relationship, which even though we weren't children into our 20s and 30s, it still has that flavor to it.
Yes.
But now we are in this together, and we're a team,
Yes.
and we have an agreement to live together, and we support each other in our daily life. So Paul has a lot of responsibilities around the house, and he does them. And I have a lot of responsibilities, and as does my husband, and we all do them. And it's just like a different flavor of a relationship. And I'm also, one of the joys that I'm seeing is also his change and his evolution, and him discovering new capabilities and new skills, because I can't support him the way my mom and dad did.
Yes.
So the example of the 150 bus, that was I felt really proud that, under my watch, so to speak. 'Cause
Absolutely.
not really. Under my watch, he's able to do things with confidence that perhaps he couldn't do before.
And he's flourishing under your care.
He is. I think the other interesting thing is that I'm seeing my brothers through a different set of eyes. So I think as my parents got older, I mean, they weren't that old. Early 70s is not that old. But
which is very young nowadays.
yeah, they still were tired. I think 40 years of caregiving is very tiring.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think they didn't always see things the way I saw them. And so we had very recently, my brother has been, well, for a long time, he's been quite crabby, I have to say. And we've tried to, well, is he just getting older? Does something hurt? Like what's going on with him? We don't know. And then one day I just said, okay, I'm going to the doctor with him. And I said to her, can you please figure out what is going on with him? He's just so cranky. And she said, well, has he done a sleep test? I said, no. So he did a sleep test, and we found out that my brother has been waking up 67 times a night.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually the average is 5. So when I think back, I think he probably hasn't slept properly in about 8 to 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And very recently, so as a result, we got a CPAP machine.
Yes.
And now we can't get him out of bed. He's just sleeping and sleeping, as you know, because when you came over, it was 11 o'clock and he was still in bed. But I'm
envious.
Yeah, me too. But as a result, he's happier. I think his health is greatly impacted by having proper sleeps. And so I'm also, that's a real joy for me that I could see a problem through a different set of eyes, have the ability to solve it and give him a better quality of life for it.
And I can completely understand. It's like when I teach my students and you give them the tools and then they flourish, and you know that you've had some part in their success.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I can completely understand that.
Yeah.
And with you, how has looking after your brother changed you as a person?
I think it's changed me profoundly. So I think that I was not a very patient person before. I think I was probably more selfish than I am now.
And I've met you since you're looking after your brother, and you seem to me to be extremely patient and giving.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't think I was always that way. I think I have to be patient because you can't hurry life when you have a disability.
That's very true.
The world has to wait for you. And that was
That's
a really big revelation for me. And, I talked earlier about leaving employment.
Yes.
So I did leave my full-time employment and I started my own consulting practice. And I have to say that's because I can work at home.
Yes.
From there. And that has been an amazing transformation for me as well. So actually, I'm more happy professionally now than I've ever been in my life.
Yes.
And
That's great.
Yeah, I'm very pleased with the work I'm doing. I'm doing work in the disability community partially.
Yes.
And it's nice to be able to make a change professionally as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And what work are you doing in the disability community?
Well, I'm an evaluator.
Yes.
So I'm doing evaluations of programs. And what I like about doing evaluations is you're building up programs.
I love that.
When you work for the public service, you're usually tearing down programs. So it's a nice change for me to to do the opposite, do what I wanted to do, and help people speak to funders and grantors to give them access to more money, help people action their plans and their ideas for better programming and better services.
Yes, and I know you're also doing wonderful work in relation. You've started something which I just think is absolutely amazing, and I would love it if you tell our public about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's actually two things that I've started. So I recently won a grant from the McConnell Foundation
Yes.
to work on a constructive engagement to try and get the government of Ontario to follow the leadership of the government of BC, and also to change our gifts and assets level limit in Ontario.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah, so I'm building a coalition of interested organizations and individuals who support this change. And I'm also trying to find the information that the government of Ontario needs in order to make the regulatory change.
Which is brilliant,
Mm-hmm.
and we're happy to have you in our community as
Thank
well.
you.
And what would you like the world to know about autism?
I would like the world to know about possibility, building on, building on the good things, the assets. Never, in the spirit of my parents, never believing when people tell you that your family member can't do something, or that they don't have a right to something, or that they need to be a certain way because they are disabled or have a disability. It's really, it's not true. There are possibilities for the future.
And I agree, and I love that. And I agree, and I hope my public is listening, and the word possibility is possible.
Yes.
And I want to thank you, Helen, for educating us about your story so that we may have more insight about how to properly and adequately prepare for our children's future when we've passed. I truly believe that the information you've given us today has not only changed our perspective about what being prepared is, but also the necessity of being current with the latest information to be able to make the most informed decisions in the lives of our most precious, our children. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Helen is also building a coalition and organization and individuals to help push the government of Ontario to follow the leadership that's taken place in British Columbia, where the asset level limit has changed from 5,000 to 100,000 and gift limits have been removed. If you want to support the coalition and learn more about Helen and her story, you can find all the information on the autism30.com webpage. And I want to remind our audience that if you're listening to us on iTunes, please don't forget to write a review and like us and join us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and YouTube. Once again, this is Tally telling you to live in love.
Hey yo, I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different.